Part 3. Uncharted Territory. Quote, "In science, as in politics and religion, it is a lot easier to believe what you have been taught than to set out for yourself and ascertain what happens." End quote. Upton Sinclair, Mental Radio. Quote, "Science of today, the superstition of tomorrow. Science of tomorrow, the superstition of today." End quote. Charles Fort, The Book of the Damned. Chapter 24. The Unconscious at Your Service. We have 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, which we rely on to give us information. Yet we know that there is much more going on around us than we can perceive. For instance, all around me are the various frequencies of the radio and television stations broadcasting to my area. These frequencies pass through the walls, and even through my body. The machinery of my body is not designed to pick up these signals, and so it's as if they don't exist. However, a different sort of machine with different sensory apparatus, a television or radio with an aerial, will receive those frequencies and interpret them into usable information. The experience of being conscious is an experience of limitation. Our consciousness is tuned to the physical universe, and our sense of sight is able to receive only a minuscule part of the electromagnetic spectrum known as visible light. This understanding should give pause to those who think exclusively in terms of material minimalism. If I can't detect it, it isn't real. It's all well and good that we know about radio waves today, but imagine trying to explain them to someone in the 15th century. In the future, people will have little boxes that they hold up to their mouths to talk to each other. I could stand at the far side of the lake over there and talk to you as if I were standing right beside you. The box changes your speech into an invisible wave that flies out in all directions, traveling much farther than your voice can extend. And the other box receives the wave, changes it back into sound, and speaks it into the air so that the other person can hear it with his own ears. A reasonable person of the time period might reply, "Little boxes that can listen to you as if they have ears? Then throw your voice over great distances and even speak back to you as if they have mouths? How ridiculous! What proof can you offer me of this nonsense? I don't believe it." In this case, allowing yourself to be led by evidence alone would have brought you to the wrong conclusion. Absence of proof is not proof of absence, and yet many people continually treat evidence as the singular factor in determining what is both true and untrue, possible and impossible, ridiculous and sensible. We should not be so quick to label something as impossible when it may be simply undetected. As conscious entities locked into a specific range of perception, we simply have no way of knowing what exists outside of us that we are not perceiving. We may make certain discoveries with scientific instruments, and we have. Gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet, infrared, microwaves, radio waves, but we never know how much or how little there really is going on. Reality may well be far more multidimensional than we realize. Another aspect of our limited range of perception is our limited focus of attention. We are always focused on one thing or another, never on many things at once. I cannot watch a movie on television while writing this book. It's impossible for my mind to attend to the 2 activities simultaneously. I might attempt to switch between 2 things periodically, but attention is always on one or the other. I can play the piano a little with both hands, which appears to defy this logic, but always my focus is on one of the hands, while the other plays a repeating pattern that I have trained my mind to handle without the need for attention. As we experience life and accumulate memories, those memories are not ever present with us, but go into storage. They are only useful to us when accessed and focused upon afresh. You've probably heard the term subconscious or unconscious mind. What exactly is it, and do we possess one? Well, what precisely it is remains something of a mystery, but you'll get a sense of it by example. It's undeniable that we do possess an unconscious mind, since it can be shown that we use it every day, mostly without realizing it. Your conscious mind is aware of only a fraction of the information that is presented to it in your moment-to-moment experience. You might go out for a walk and not notice the sound of birdsong. You might be so engrossed in a television program that you don't notice someone in the room asking you a question. You may have listened to a song 50 times but never noticed a subtle bass line until one particular moment when your attention is drawn to it. When you drive a car, countless aspects of your environment slip by while you concentrate on the road ahead. They are within sight of your eyes, but there is no opportunity to pay them any attention as you navigate the twists and turns of the road. The conscious mind is stuck in 5-sense awareness and able to pay attention to only a narrow band of those 5 senses at any moment. The unconscious mind, however, sees it all, making a permanent recording of everything that the conscious mind misses. It is not restricted by a focus of attention. Think of the unconscious like a dark attic with all sorts of stuff lying around in it, and the conscious mind like the beam of a flashlight illuminating only one spot. Critical thinking is a process of the conscious mind. The unconscious, on the other hand, has no sense of judgment whatsoever. It is like a robot. If someone says something to us, or we read a piece of information, the conscious mind is able to actively judge the worth of that message and decide whether it is true or false. But if the message goes straight to the unconscious by bypassing conscious awareness, the unconscious will automatically and passively accept it without our awareness. Why does the mind work in this unfortunate way? Actually, if it didn't function in this manner, we would be in real trouble. When I was a child, learning to type for the first time was a frustratingly slow process. I would rove my finger over the keyboard for maybe 5 seconds, just looking for the V key. With continual practice, I learned to memorize the layout and find the keys at a much faster pace. But something more than memorization was also taking place. In the early days, I still had to consciously direct each finger to each key, but in time it started to happen automatically. What I was doing, without realizing it, was training my unconscious mind. You can think of the unconscious as a faithful servant who constantly pays attention to what you're doing, always on the lookout for repetitive patterns, so that it can take some of the workload off your conscious mind. Nowadays, in my typing experience, there is a direct connection between a simple intent of the will for a word to appear on the screen and its appearance. My fingers do my bidding with little or no conscious thought. If you're reasonably good at typing, try it. Think of a sentence, type it on your keyboard, then afterwards reflect on how aware you were of what your fingers were doing. I'm betting not a lot. Amusingly, I sometimes have the experience of a wrong word slipping out through my fingers. I don't mean a typing error like TRUDT instead of trust. I mean something like trash instead of trust, where a totally different yet perfectly formed word from the one intended pops out. It's as if the unconscious mishears me and grabs the wrong word from my mental dictionary. Driving is another good example. If you're an experienced driver, you will remember the hardship of learning to drive. It's especially difficult here in the United Kingdom, where automatic gears are not the norm. You have to learn the correct order of 3 foot pedals, clutch, brake and accelerator, and the positions of 5 gears. Oh, and not forgetting reverse. While remembering those, you have to know how to properly lower and raise the clutch while changing the gear, simultaneously steering and paying attention to the road. When you become an experienced driver, the whole car just feels like an extension of your body. You barely have to think about what your limbs are doing as you navigate. You can even give most of your conscious attention to a conversation with a passenger. All of this is possible because you have successfully trained your unconscious to handle what your conscious mind originally had to perform on its own. If we didn't have an unconscious mind to aid us, every trip in the car would feel like your first ever driving lesson. I once had an amusing experience not long after I moved house. It was my habit to drive home from work at lunchtime, so one day I got in the car and started driving, not giving conscious thought to where I was heading. I ended up pulling into the driveway of my previous house before I realized my mistake. I had literally said to my unconscious, "Take me home." And my unconscious followed the old program it had been trained to perform while my conscious mind occupied itself elsewhere, probably doing some dangerous daydreaming. This shows just how elaborate our unconscious programming can become. The unconscious is what regulates our bodies. We do not need to think in order to breathe. Certainly, we can consciously take control of our lungs at any time by choosing to take a shallow breath or a deep breath. But we don't have to. We won't die if we forget to breathe. Actually, strike that. We will die if we forget to breathe. But it's the unconscious that remembers for us and does it on our behalf. Some claim to be able to regulate their own heart rate and blood pressure by the same principle of wresting control from the unconscious. We all make use of our unconscious every day without thinking about it. It is a faithful servant that makes life so much easier. Without it, life would be an intolerable drudgery, if not an impossibility, as our every motion would require our full conscious attention. There is a downside to having an unconscious mind. It tends to make the world a duller place. New experiences can be stimulating, but once they are repeated several times, they lose their excitement. This is because the unconscious notices a pattern, learns it, and all but has the experience on your behalf. I once lived in a neighbourhood that I detested for 3 years. When I finally had opportunity to move back to the area where I grew up, one of the first activities I did was to get on my bicycle and go riding through the nearby countryside, something I had done often in my youth. The experience was utter bliss. I had missed this simple pleasure so much. However, now that I have repeated this experience hundreds of times since, it has lost much of its excitement. This is because my unconscious has spotted the pattern and taken over. Contrast this with the excitement of a dog, whose much simpler mind never fails to be enthralled by its surroundings each time it goes for a walk to the same place. You can, however, prevent the unconscious from stealing the vitality out of your experiences. Some years ago, I took the notion to record a little video of my local countryside. As I cycled around looking for interesting scenes to shoot, I found myself suddenly getting excited by the simplest things, such as a particular view of dead leaves on a lawn, with the sun shining through the branches of a tree. Items that I ordinarily took no notice of became extraordinarily interesting. What I had done, without realizing it, was prevent my unconscious mind from living on my behalf. Aldous Huxley, in The Doors of Perception, 1954, describes the experience of taking the drug mescaline as a kind of hyper-awareness of everything being utterly fascinating beyond belief. It's as if the robotic side of consciousness was temporarily disabled, allowing every perception to be fresh. I recall having a similar experience in my teens, obtained without the aid of drugs. One of my ears had become completely blocked with wax to the point where I could hear nothing through that orifice. I lived with it like this for a couple of months and adjusted completely, to the point where monaural hearing felt completely natural. I could get by with one working ear and didn't really miss stereo sound. Even listening to music with headphones felt natural with only one ear functioning. When I finally went to the doctor to get the ear canal cleaned out, the experience of regaining the use of a second ear was exhilarating. Directly afterwards, I found myself walking around the town centre, drinking in the sheer pleasure of all the crisp, clear stereo sound. I was listening to nothing more than car engines and chattering shoppers, but the sounds became utterly new and fascinating. Of course, once I got used to hearing with 2 ears again, the experience turned stale. The robot had taken over. The unconscious lives vast portions of our lives for us. One way to prevent this, to turn mundane experiences into exciting experiences, is to start taking notice of your surroundings again. Force yourself to become conscious of what is going on in your sensory experience. Be in the moment. Unconscious, and its older synonym, subconscious, are merely mythic labels that Western science invents to account for the behaviours of the mind that happen unconsciously or subconsciously, below awareness. In composing a meaningful model of the mind, there appears to be me existing in a state of limited cognition and limited perception, and a more mysterious me working behind the scenes. Talking to ourselves is something we often do without realizing it. I might say to myself, what's the name of the actor who played Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars? I can't remember. Anything from a moment to several minutes later, the answer will pop into my conscious mind as if from nowhere. Alec Guinness. Now, the next time you have a conversation with yourself like that, ask yourself what process you went through to recall the information you wanted, because I have no idea what I did beyond simply creating a request for the information. The unconscious just seems to get on with the task, and then it gives you the answer when it's done, sometimes at a completely unexpected moment. Spooky. Notice also how this talking to oneself is an admission of there being 2 aspects to you, an upfront part doing the experiencing of the world, and a behind-the-scenes part doing the work. See how we naturally think of both parts as me. We should be careful about viewing this inner duality as 2 distinct entities. The behind-the-scenes aspect of the mind is nothing more than a subservient robot, while the upfront aspect acts as a scanner on the world. Consciousness itself is a singular phenomenon that arises within this mental arrangement. It's not as if there are 2 persons inhabiting one body. We only think of the unconscious as separate because we have a tendency to identify the self as the scanner. This does not mean that the unconscious is literally a separate self. While the unconscious acts as a faithful servant to the conscious mind, we must remember that we are merely modelling the mind in a way that helps us understand its workings. It's all you, singular. There is a scene in the 2009 remake of the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still where Jennifer Connelly and Keanu Reeves pull into a car park at night. The camera is positioned in front of their car, looking in through the windscreen. As the vehicle grinds to a halt, the reflection of a huge letter M crawls up the glass, a yellow M with very familiar curved peaks. If you've seen the movie, do you recall this huge McDonald's advertisement thrust in your face? If you spotted it, good for you, because you weren't supposed to. It's what's known as a subliminal, which means below threshold. Something that's designed to get into your head by bypassing the critical faculty of normal conscious awareness. Most people have heard of subliminal messages, and the example that probably comes to mind is a lightning-quick message flashed across a screen, gone before you've time to read it. That certainly is a subliminal, but subliminals are also much more crafty than this. In the above movie, the attention of most viewers is on the conversation Jennifer and Keanu are having, not on the McDonald's logo. Typically, we look through the glass, not directly at it. Someone may ask, what's the value of an advertisement if no one pays attention to it? But when you understand something of the nature of the mind, then it becomes clear that it's precisely your lack of attention the advertisers are counting on. The unconscious mind, your faithful servant, makes a perfect recording of everything you experience, regardless of your focus of attention. So the darkened room of your unconscious now has a big letter M lying around among the other junk. What difference does that make? How can that influence you to rush out and buy a Big Mac? What value has a logo without a sales pitch? Ah, but there was a sales pitch. Picture this. You're sitting at home, warm and snug in your living room, tucking into a snack, while the day the earth stood still is pouring out of the TV across the room and into your eyes. While you're in this feel-good state, a big McDonald's logo is staring you in the face, but you don't see it. Your unconscious, however, sees all. Always trying to take the workload off your conscious mind, your unconscious forges a link between the pleasurable emotional state and the McDonald's logo, because it thinks that's what you wish to happen. Later, when you drive your car past the local McDonald's takeaway and you spot that big letter M on the building, you may start to feel good and have no idea why. It's really your unconscious dictating the feeling, because that's what your experience taught it to do. The effect is so subtle that you don't even ask yourself why you feel good. Of course, one subliminal message in one movie isn't going to have much of an effect. A cumulative effect is created by the constant repetition of the same theme again and again in other movies and during commercial breaks. Just look at how often we are subjected to advertisements. Every 10 to 15 minutes of airtime is interrupted by 3 to 5 minutes of advertisements. The commercial breaks are usually broadcast at a higher volume than the program, and are often timed to coincide with breaks on other channels in case you switch. None of this, I'll wager, is by accident. Ask yourself, how many television advertisements are designed to inform you, whereas how many are designed to make you feel something? With this in mind, you can start to appreciate the importance of a company having a distinct, simple, identifiable symbol on their products and services. In time, your unconscious learns a clear message from the experiences you feed it, and it starts to tell you, McDonald's makes me feel good. And unless you've educated yourself with the likes of Morgan Spurlock's documentary Super Size Me, 2004, which exposed the horrors of the fast food industry, then you have no reason not to follow what makes you feel good. Big Mac and fries, please. Around 2008, in the UK, there was a television advertisement for the new cervical cancer vaccine that was being introduced for teenage girls. Did this advert inform the public of the medical facts about cervical cancer and the vaccine? No. Instead, it staged a little feel-good play where a schoolgirl sang a song with words like, "Had the job we need, girls feeling safe," combined with images of her playing netball with her friends on the school court. This was aimed at teenage girls and was designed to stimulate the positive emotions associated with fun school activities, then transfer those emotions to the cervical cancer vaccine, regardless of what the viewer does or doesn't know about the vaccine. The only useful information in the advertisement was an internet address at the tail end, where you could go and get the facts. I mean, really, who keeps a notepad by their armchair to take down websites while they watch TV? Based on the content of the advert itself, it was essentially saying, you don't need to think. Information is irrelevant. Just feel how we want you to feel. How about instead using those 30 seconds to properly inform the public about the risks of developing cervical cancer and about the side effects of the vaccine? Then mothers and fathers can make an informed choice about whether to have their daughters vaccinated. But no, the National Health Service prefers to subject schoolgirls to mind control, to lull them into feeling positive emotions, instead of presenting impartial freedom of choice. Another alarming TV advertisement was a recruiting drive by the British Armed Forces called Start Thinking Soldier. The advert dramatised a combat scenario in the style of a first-person shooter video game. using the television screen as the eyes of the soldier. It was clearly designed to appeal to the young male gaming generation. The viewer is reminded of the good feelings associated with playing games, the adrenaline rush of full-on virtual combat, the pleasure of outwitting an enemy with superior tactics. The unconscious is then encouraged to link the real-life combat shown on the advertisement with the good feelings of video games. The message is clear. You like video games? Well, if you want the ultimate adrenaline rush, sign up for the armed forces. No useful information, no critical thinking encouraged. It's all feel, feel, feel. Feel what we want you to feel. You're the donkey. Just follow the carrot we're holding in front of your nose. No need to think. Remember, this isn't an advert that's trying to make you change your brand of fabric softener. It's using the feeling you get from killing video game characters and attempting to associate it with the killing of real people in real war. These are not sinister exceptions in an otherwise clean and safe world of advertising. This is how the whole advertising game is played. It's the straightforward and informative adverts that are the exception. Emotional manipulation is the norm. Ever watch a television advert and you thought it was completely daft? Doesn't matter. Did it make you laugh? That's what mattered. Can you even remember what the product was? Doesn't matter. Your unconscious took note of the brand logo, and rest assured you'll feel good when you see it again. Why would a company pay thousands of pounds to parade a celebrity in front of your nose for 30 seconds, when a second-rate actor would do just as well? You won't feel the same way about Joe Bloggs as you do about Bruce Willis, advertising Aviva Insurance, Ewan McGregor, Davidoff Adventure Fragrance, Samuel L. Jackson, Virgin Media Broadband. We've all had experiences with celebrities before, because we've enjoyed their movies, appreciated their recipes, tapped our feet to their music. Their presence in an advertisement is not to inform you. The advertisers know that if you like a celebrity, it's easy to transfer that feeling to the product he's peddling. There's often no rational reason to like the product, and there doesn't need to be, because human beings tend to blindly follow their feelings and not examine how those feelings arose in the first place. Advertisers manipulate your unconscious mind into feeling good about a product or service, regardless of what you know or don't know about it. This is how the wool is pulled over our eyes. This is how we are treated like sheep every day. This is how we make decisions without any awareness that a great part of the decision-making process is being done for us, below threshold. I encourage everyone to start watching their televisions in a radically different manner. In movies and dramas, keep an eye out for those product placement logos. In advertisements, always ask, what am I being encouraged to feel right now and why? When a subliminal is spotted, all its power over you is instantly gone, because the critical thinking of the conscious mind now has its say. And if you want to go as far as tossing your television in the trash, the world may laugh, but I won't be joining in. The film Dawn of the Dead, 1978, is on one level just a horror movie, but it also happens to contain a profound subtext. 4 humans take refuge in a shopping mall from the undead hordes ravaging the world. From the safety of the roof, they gaze at the zombies who wander aimlessly about the car park. Fran asks Stephen, "What are they doing? Why did they come here?" Stephen replies, "Some kind of instinct, memory of what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives." In another scene, another survivor, Peter, says, "They're after the place. They don't know why, they just remember that they want to be in here." Fran asks, "What the hell are they?" Peter says, "They're us, that's all." In other words, when Peter looked at the brain-dead behavior of the zombies, there was no significant difference from the behavior of an average human being. We're zombies. To one extent or another, we've been lulled into becoming mind-controlled, non-thinking zombies by a rectangle that sits in the corner of the living room. We think we have free will, unaware of how often we're actually reacting to emotional stimuli that have been craftily implanted in us. The mind control of advertising can only be described as genius, since it can manipulate you to do something whilst you feel it was entirely your own free choice. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. In the realm of big business, in the hands of people with questionable ethics, this deep understanding of the human mind becomes a tool for the exploitation of the human race. Be vigilant for their invisible schemes. I once knew a young woman who found it extremely uncomfortable to be photographed. At first, I thought her reaction to cameras was based on insecurity about her appearance, but I later learned from her that the origin of her fear lay much deeper. As a young child, her parents had hired a professional photographer for her birthday party each year. It was always the same man, a bearded individual whose physical appearance frightened the child. Naturally, the photographer was never seen without his camera. And so the girl's unconscious mind associated the negative emotion she was feeling with the camera as well as the man. When this experience was reinforced over a few years, the same emotions subsequently occurred when any camera was pointed at the girl, regardless of who was holding it. The unconscious, in an attempt to be helpful, was now dictating the experience it thought the conscious mind had asked for. It's exactly the same underlying principle as what happens when we learn to drive, or when we are subjected to subliminal advertising. The unconscious looks for repeating patterns of behavior and starts to perform them on behalf of the conscious mind. As an adult, the woman was completely aware that her fear of cameras was irrational, but the feelings persisted regardless of what her conscious mind knew. A camera appeared, and the unconscious said, "Oh, there's a camera pointed at me. I know what I'm supposed to feel. Fear." The conscious mind says, "Stop it. This is irrational. There's no reason I should feel like this." And the unconscious replies, "Sorry, but I already know what I'm supposed to be doing." The mind works this way because it's meant to. Ordinarily, it's helpful to be able to bypass conscious awareness. It's why typing this chapter into a computer took a couple of days instead of a month. If it were easy to retrain my unconscious, I would be able to regress my typing skills just by telling my unconscious to forget them. Let me test that. Foiled. I'm still typing as rapidly as ever. That's why the unconscious isn't listening to the conscious mind, even when the conscious mind attempts to correct it. One way to remove the old unwanted program is by the use of the same method that put it there in the first place: repetition. To cure a phobia, teach your unconscious a new experience. The most direct and difficult way to do this is to confront the fear head-on by performing the action that makes you afraid. At first, the irrational fear will hit you in the face, but as you repeat the experience again and again, each time pushing the fear away and denying it, eventually the unconscious will accept the new behavior pattern and remove the old. There is also an easier way. Not only does the unconscious pay attention to what you experience through your 5 senses, it also pays attention to what you imagine with your mind. For instance, a man can experience sexual arousal either by looking at an attractive woman or by imagining an attractive woman. In both cases, the unconscious takes the image and triggers the body's sexual response. It's important to realize that the unconscious is never actually responding to something outside of you. We see not with our eyes, but with the visual cortex at the back of the brain. The unconscious makes absolutely no distinction about whether your attention is focused on information that flows into your brain from the outside world or information that you manufacture in your imagination. Fantasies are powerful, not just in terms of sexuality. The woman with the camera phobia could try imagining herself being photographed and getting great enjoyment out of the experience. She could make up any imaginary scenario, be it walking on a beach or modeling on a catwalk. It's important to be vivid and to inject positive emotion into the fantasy. Relax as deeply as you can when doing this. Lying in bed at night just before falling asleep is a great time, because there is less mental chatter getting in the way. When you do this again and again, your unconscious will take note and eventually overwrite the old program with the new one. Emotion is the key. When using your imagination, it is important that you feel rather than think. Thinking does not get you through to the unconscious mind, because the unconscious mind does not rationalize. Unhelpful emotional responses, such as phobias, occur because of your own suggestibility. That same suggestibility is the very tool you must use to undo them. But there is one subtle difference. This time, it is a deliberately induced and consciously directed suggestibility. Do not accept what your mind dictates you should feel if those feelings are demonstrably irrational. When you are weary of continually striving against unhelpful emotional responses, recognize that these feelings are being dictated by your unconscious, and you can reprogram it using your imagination. In this endeavor, take care that you do not attempt to suppress entirely proper emotional responses. Spiritually inclined persons are particularly prone to holding idealized notions about human nature that are divorced from the reality of what we are as a species. Anger is a favorite defect that we target in ourselves. To get rid of our anger, we stick a plug in it and congratulate ourselves on our spiritual progress. But the energy behind the emotion continually strives to discharge itself on any available target. Persons with anger issues are living with a store of unresolved anger that keeps leaking out. I understand why anger is regarded as a negative emotion, because it can so easily lead to a loss of self-control. But it's really just a call to action, coming from a region of the brain that's older and more basic than the area where we do our complex reasoning. Anger should be respected as a legitimate human emotion and allowed to discharge through responsible confrontation. Even more desirable is when anger can be resolved using thoughtful reanalysis of a situation, because sometimes our anger stems from our own stupidity and we just need to think smarter. Either way, suppression is not the solution. Sometimes it's our unrealistic view of human nature that needs fixing, not our emotions. Sexuality is an area of human experience where the unconscious plays a significant role. Psychologist Jesse Bering, in an interview recorded at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas in 2012, related a particularly tragic story of a boy whose first experiences of masturbation revolved around the discovery of photos of naked women in a medical textbook that belonged to his father. These happened to be pictures of amputees. The boy experienced a natural attraction to the female form, but while stimulating himself, his unconscious mind, incapable of judgment, associated all aspects of the image with erotic arousal, including the absence of a limb. As a result, he developed a paraphilia, an attraction to something outside of what is normally considered sexually stimulating, and knew of no means to undo it. Later, he married a woman who had a missing limb. When she eventually found out about his condition by discovering amputee pornography on his computer, she divorced him because she felt deceived. From his perspective, his sexual inclination was a source of great shame, not something he felt he could share with her. This is an example of the unconscious mind leading us in an unhelpful direction, crystallizing our erotic impulses into a distorted shape. Many of us have developed sexual kinks of one kind or another. This is nothing to be ashamed of. It's merely the natural outcome of our self-directed sexual curiosity. But the example above should make us cautious about what material we allow into our minds. Pornography, for instance, ranges from typical nude poses to truly bizarre sexual practices. However, before we make a universal condemnation of all pornography, pause for a moment and consider, what do you think would have happened if the boy above had found a copy of Playboy in his dad's belongings instead of the medical textbook? He likely wouldn't have ended up eroticizing the stumps from missing limbs, because his unconscious mind wouldn't have forged that link. Ironically, it was a climate of sexual repression that created the conditions leading to the boy's distorted sexuality, albeit accidentally. Before we swing the other way and give pornography an unequivocal thumbs up, imagine what might have transpired if the boy had instead discovered a fetish mag featuring a paraphilia. As long as he found the women in the photos to be stimulating, there's a fair chance the paraphilia would also embed itself in his sexual makeup, because that is precisely what happened with the medical textbook. Additionally, it's not just outside influences that distort our sexuality. Sometimes the wellspring of the problem lies within ourselves. Imagination is just as powerful as physical imagery. Whether you indulge in strange fantasies about sex or watch unusual sex acts with your eyes makes little difference to the brain. It will respond to either stimulus. We have already discussed television advertising as a form of mind control, where the unconscious is lulled into associating pleasurable emotions with visual stimuli. The same principle is at work in pornography. Sexual arousal, particularly during orgasm, is a deeply suggestible state. In the throes of passion, the thinking mind is not getting in the way. This makes it relatively easy for our sexual inclinations to be reshaped to our detriment by the whims of pornographers or the fancies of our own imagination. Why do pornographers produce unusual material? They do it because there is a demand for it. A better question then is, why do people seek out unusual pornography? It may surprise you to learn that this is not a new trend in human sexuality. The most shocking excesses of modern pornography are fully present in the Marquis de Sade's erotic play, Philosophy in the Bedroom, first published in 1795. The root of the problem lies with the human race's odd obsession with sex. Every animal species integrates the sexual instinct as an ordinary part of its life, except man. Man takes sexuality, invents all kinds of rules and regulations for sexual conduct, manufactures all sorts of taboos, and engages in all manner of shaming. In short, we have a deeply unnatural relationship with our own sexuality. I've thought a lot about when, how, and why human sexuality took this unusual turn, and I've come to the conclusion that it was likely due to the noblest of intentions. One of the chief concerns of religion in general is to aid mankind in reaching its highest ethical potential. Self-control is vital in this pursuit because we experience impulses that are unruly. And nowhere do we feel less in control of ourselves than in the arena of sexuality. I could cite myriad examples, but one will suffice. Imagine a single man who experiences lust for his best friend's beautiful wife. The evolutionarily older and more basic reptilian and limbic regions of the brain are screaming, "She's gorgeous! Take her now!" Simultaneously, the more recent and complex neocortical region looks on in horror and guiltily responds, "I mustn't betray my friend." Our sex drive is powerful. It doesn't care about our ethics. It doesn't even care about whether the object of its attention would be a compatible personality to live with. It just wants to make more humans, and it will happily derail our lives to accomplish that if we let it. So you can understand how human sexuality historically came to be viewed as an enemy of our well-being and progress. This is not a development unique to Western culture. If we look to the East, the monks of early Buddhism were required to be celibate, just like the Christian monks. This did not apply to the common people of either culture, of course. But the point is this: the type of person who was the most concerned with spiritual development was the most anti-sex. And while the common people would have largely continued to satisfy their carnal cravings, this could no longer be done without the feeling that the monks were morally superior for their abstinence. That's my best speculation on how the link between sex and shame was forged. Parents, today as in the past, sorrow over the impending loss of their child's innocence. But the opposite of innocence is, of course, guilt. During puberty, a person becomes guilty of turning into a sexual being. This is not something we usually admit outright to ourselves. If we did, we would see how absurd it is. Instead, we blindly inherit a vague and incomprehensible feeling that we've been corrupted in some way by puberty. When you take something naturally exciting like sex and associate it with sin, that doesn't prevent people from exploring their sexuality. Instead, the excitement of sex is combined with the thrill of breaking the rules, giving you a doubly potent emotional cocktail. The existence of so many rules also promotes addiction, because any natural desire that is frustrated tends to become an obsession. Christian teenagers get the rawest deal of all as they listen to pastors preach on the evils of lust. The greater the taboo, the greater the desire. The sickness that the pastor wants to cure is only exacerbated by his particular medicine. Why is it that a man finds an accidental glimpse up a woman's skirt far more exciting than viewing a woman in a bathing costume? This is rather odd, since in both cases the same amount of flesh is visible around her nether region. But one scenario is socially acceptable and the other is not. A peek at something inappropriate provides a greater emotional charge than, say, a biology textbook with a full frontal nude of a woman. We've become a species of sex addicts because we've associated sexuality with taboo, enabling us to increase the excitement by breaking the taboo. However, when you break the same taboo often enough, you begin to feel that you're not really doing anything naughty. So you look for another taboo to break. And so begins the process of our sexual appetite becoming stranger and stranger. The excesses of pornography aren't the problem. They're just the most visible symptom of the problem. We are all sexually dysfunctional to one extent or another. Our culture taught us early in life that the most exciting sex is wrong sex, a lesson that only the human animal learns. This attitude of mind will not be undone until we've learned to sever the link between sex and shame, to make sex ordinary again. This is not an easy task for an individual today, if it's even possible. The real winners will be future generations, living in a more sexually intelligent civilization, uninfected by shame. But we have quite a way to go. Look at the topsy-turvy nature of our present culture's sexual attitudes. A 15-year-old boy looks at a 15-year-old girl, then remarks to a male friend, "She's sexy." We say that's acceptable. But if a 30-year-old man looks at a 15-year-old girl and thinks, "She's sexy," he'd better not say that to anyone for fear of being branded a pervert. But in reality, the primal appeal of the female form does not change as we get older. In high school, I liked girls who were my age. I also thought my English teacher had great legs. This didn't make me a pervert. Neither is it perversion when an adult finds a teenager attractive. Even without makeup and sexy clothes, a girl in her mid-teens possesses womanly curves that are designed to appeal to the male of our species. But a grown man is expected to pretend that he doesn't find her appealing, because that's what polite society dictates. He should be thoroughly ashamed of himself for feeling attracted to this child. What am I advocating here? That men should seduce underage girls? No. Having an age of consent law is a positive move for civilization that I fully respect. I'm simply saying that a man doesn't have to feel ashamed of his natural desires. It's perfectly possible to acknowledge that a girl is desirable while also acknowledging that she's immature and respecting the fact that she's under the care of her parents. Being honest about the primal side of one's nature doesn't make anyone a pervert. Shame shouldn't be part of the equation. In fact, it's shame that turns a girl's ordinary desirability into an obsessional complex. She is desired all the more because she is taboo. The Marquis de Sade probably regarded himself as someone who was sexually liberated, but the opposite is true. He talks about how man should follow his natural appetites without restraint, but he is unable to distinguish nature from his own personal sexual neuroses, the latter being symptoms of his obsession with sex, and his obsession being a symptom of his cultural conditioning. A truly liberated person is not one who revels in how shameful sex is, but one who has broken the link between sex and shame. I once got into a debate about hardcore pornography. At the time, I argued that it was unethical on the grounds that quite a bit of porn portrays women like human ashtrays. My opponent kept coming back to me with the objection, why is it wrong? What if I enjoy being humiliated and degraded during sex? And I had to concede there are such individuals. How can I tell them they're doing something morally wrong if it's something they want and they're not being harmed against their will? Eventually, I realized that this wasn't a moral issue at root. It was about psychological abnormality. For instance, there's nothing evil about having an attraction to amputees, but you wouldn't wish to develop that paraphilia on purpose. When a person enjoys sexual humiliation, or its counterpart, sadism, it's not morally reprehensible, but it is a manifestation of how we've learned to make sex more exciting by making it feel wrong. We can accept this if we wish, but wouldn't it be better for one's overall psychological health to try and fix the root problem from which such symptoms spring? The popular justification of sexual excess is not a true liberation from sexual repression. It's a consequence of the sense of shame we've thus far failed to outgrow. It used to puzzle me that a massive hardcore pornography industry exists in the United States when the country has such a large Christian population, 70.6% of citizens according to Pew Research Center in 2016. But now I get it. Those with the most taboos about sex will naturally have the biggest obsession with sex. The real challenge is learning to integrate our sexual nature into our lives in a sane, healthy way. The erotic beauty of the human body should be enjoyed without shame, whether that is in the form of gazing at a beautiful woman on the street or viewing dirty pictures on the internet. Pornography only becomes detrimental when its consumption is fueled by the excitement of breaking taboos. If you have a problem with porn addiction, the main lesson you need to learn is that you're not actually doing anything wrong. Once you truly accept this, the urge to compulsively consume pornography wanes. What if living through years of sexual obsessiveness has already caused deep psychological changes? Is it possible to take your mind down an avenue that leaves you scarred for life? Unfortunately, yes. In the case of the man with the amputee paraphilia, he appears to be stuck with it. Unlike phobias, which can be conquered with a bit of effort, it does not appear to be easy to reprogram one's sexuality once the initial programming has taken root. Pandora's box, when opened, stays open. The mind isn't a spiritual entity that exists independently of the brain. The desires of the mind are a reflection of the physical structure of the brain itself. What we don't often realize is that we had a conscious hand in the manner of our own brain's development as we were growing up. The desires we now experience as adults are hardwired into our grey matter. The brain does have a remarkable ability to modify its own functions, called neuroplasticity. An episode of the television documentary series Extraordinary People, 2007, entitled Living with Half a Brain, tells the story of a little girl named Cameron Mott, who started displaying the symptoms of a rare brain disease called Rasmussen's encephalitis when she was just 3 years old. The only cure was a radical surgical operation called a hemispherectomy, the complete removal or disconnection of one side of the brain. As predicted, after the operation, Cameron suffered paralysis along one side of her body. You could be forgiven for thinking that this paralysis would be permanent, given that the side of the brain which had controlled the functioning of that side of the body had been obliterated. But shortly after surgery, the doctors were encouraging her to try and move her limbs again. Slowly but surely, with great persistence, her limbs came back to life. They never reached 100% of their original dexterity, but they were far from paralyzed. The undamaged side of Cameron's brain had reorganized itself to perform new functions. However, neuroplasticity has limits. I am reminded of the case of Oksana Malaya, a Ukrainian girl whose abusive parents put her outdoors, making her live in a kennel from ages 3 to 8, where her primary company was dogs. She was found in 1991, barking like a dog, unable to speak, and walking around on all fours. Now an adult, Malaya has learned to talk, but she remains cognitively impaired and lives in a mental institution. The perverse living experience she was put through in childhood caused her to forge a distorted sense of identity which became hardwired into her brain and could not be completely repaired. Most of us, given a choice, would probably prefer not to be lumbered with a paraphilia. But if it happens to be too late, it's important to realize that these deviant desires are usually quite harmless, unless they are accompanied by an irresponsible attitude or a lack of empathy. For a thorough treatment of paraphilia, I recommend Perv, The Sexual Deviant in All of Us, 2013, by Jesse Bering. Far too often, an unusual sexual desire is met with moral outrage by the masses, when it's really just a matter of aesthetics. The paraphilia affects no one. It just seems a bit disgusting to normal people. Does that make the sufferer an evil person? Of course not. Unless he is doing something that adversely affects the lives of others, there is no reason he should be condemned or condemn himself. He is just an ordinary person whose unconscious mind has taken a wrong turn. When our unconscious works against our well-being in any aspect of life, it happens because we've undergone an experience that the unconscious misinterprets. Sometimes the experience is purely accidental, and sometimes it's deliberately engineered to exploit us. It's not easy to reclaim control of yourself when the enemy is inside you. The first step is to acquire a deep knowledge of the workings of your mind. We've now got that covered. Then we need the wisdom to recognize and avoid detrimental experiences. The basic lesson to learn about the dangers associated with the unconscious mind is this: whatever you repeatedly draw into your mind, either through the eyes or the imagination, molds the behavior patterns that later emerge from it. If you are careful, the unconscious is your faithful friend, happily working on your behalf, helping you get the most out of life.